Welcome back to Theology for the Unwanted. I'm Dan Tilson, your host, and over there we have...
I'm still John. Thank you for having me back again,
John.
man. I appreciate it.
John, we have a really, really cool guest on with us today.
Very lucky.
I want everyone to think their warmest thoughts of hello to Justin from Empty Chairs. How's it going, man?
So good. I'm so excited to be here tonight. So excited
really
to be here.
Appreciate. Justin, tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so I grew up like very, very Catholic school from second grade through freshman year of college. And I was probably one of those weird kids who was like more into religion than maybe a normal kid should be. And I just think I was just really drawn to it. I just really loved it. But I did have a little bit of a rebellious streak in me. I like always wanted to go to the non-denominational church down the road because they had good music and seemed like people cared more. But kind of like fell back in love with Catholicism in high school and like went off to college determined to be Catholic. And like I was someone who like went to the Catholic Center, went to, all the Catholic events and like discerned seminary 3 times before I finally did some volunteer work with different Catholic organizations and some work with them after college for a while. And then finally got to kind of a breaking point where, I knew I was attracted to men and realized these attractions weren't going away and really had to come out to myself at the age of 25, which was a huge like breakdown moment of who I understood myself to be, like what my understanding of how God could heal things, because I thought I could totally be straight, and really, really made me kind of get to know who I was for the first time at the age of 25, instead of trying to like put on this mask or this persona that I felt I had to be for years and years. And then from there, having not great experiences coming out to people and just thinking, man, the church can do so much better, which then kind of prompted me to start the work of Empty Chairs about a year and a half ago.
We're really excited having you on because it was actually a professor of theology over in Italy that first sent me your contact.
Oh, wow.
He emailed me saying, hey, you have to check out this Empty Chairs guy. It was in a very Italian accent, but the point was, he was like, this guy's really going to resonate with your story. And of course, your content is super meaningful, reminding us of all the people that are no longer in the pews. In many ways, your story rhymes with mine and John too, for different reasons. Of course, I came out of the closet more or less the same age that you did. And here we are. So
we survived.
We are surviving.
Yes.
And what we want to talk about in today's episode is actually, what are our hopes and dreams for the future of the Catholic Church? All 3 of us here for different reasons have demanded to stay. Like I say, hey, I'm here, get used to it. Of course, I had this really interesting conundrum where I felt like I was totally unwanted by the local priest in our diocese. And at the same time, I got pulled on to do some work for the Holy See's Diplomatic Corps. And it was really tough for them to tell me to go away once I quite literally had appointments at the Vatican every other month for a little bit. So, but what I'm really hoping we can do is how do we give like a survival guide to all the Catholics out there that really just want to stay and not feel like they have to check their personality or their identity in the way that God made them at the door.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I feel like so much of my day, every day, is spent reading and responding to messages for people who are asking these questions. And there's not going to be a simple, easy answer for that. I think for me, the starting point, because I came out, had a really bad experience with the Catholic Church. And so I left Catholicism for a while, not because somebody told me to leave, but because I just didn't feel like there was room for me anymore. Like all of the, like I live in a relatively conservative diocese in Colorado. And so, and like all of my Catholic circles were fairly conservative. And so it was all or nothing, right? It was you believe all these things, you fall in line, and that's how you get your belonging, or, go someplace else. And then when I started coming back, the starting point for me was my relationship with God was not dependent on those people. Like what I loved about my relationship with God, when I felt connected to the church, yes, the people were 100% part of it. But the starting point was my experiences in prayer, my love for the liturgy, spiritual reading, spiritual direction, retreats. It was slowly reclaiming these parts of my spiritual life that I had thought I couldn't engage with anymore. And I was, wait a minute, I can go to this retreat center down the road. Like I can still go to mass no matter what people say. There's like a lot more I can say on that, but at least my starting point was like, what are the things about my faith that I love that have nothing to do with other people that I can still engage with?
John, do you remember getting that comment the other day on our Instagram profile?
Which one?
Well, it was something like, "Don't get me wrong, you're not unwanted. You're still allowed to attend mass."
Yeah, a very backhanded comment, right? Like at the end of the day, I think the one thing, and it's not specifically Catholics, I think it's a Christian overarching problem, is we as Christians are very good at making comments like that, where it's like, I think you're living in sin, but you can sit next to me in the pew. And it's like, well, what do you mean by that? Like, what are you expecting? Like, are you afraid that the divorced mother is going to cause you to get a divorce? Like, that's not how divorces work. Are you afraid the person has a gambling addiction is going to cause you to go out and play the lottery 50 times? No, that's not how this whole thing works. We are very good at pushing people away in the pews. It's absolutely absurd. I think if there's one thing that Christians are good at, it's pushing people away.
Yes.
We're also really good at feeding people, quite frankly. I mean,
and then pushing them away.
Well, the Catholic Church used to be a literal community center. Mm-hmm. We've talked about in a couple episodes now how some of the reasons why these basilicas and parishes in ancient Europe were built in such a grand way was that they were effectively government structures. But with that came a sort of institution, a political institution. And Justin, John and I have talked a lot about the culture of secrecy in the Catholic Church. And I think we're careful to say that a lot of the times that someone is told to kind of hold something deep down, it's not meant to be malicious as much as it is trying to prevent someone from falling into the occasion of sin. Now, I don't know if any of that resonates with your story and kind of processing those feelings as you realize that you were gay.
Oh, 100%. And I was literally just talking with somebody about this, and it was more specific to the fact that we have like priests can't come out. But the phrase was just like, why does the church need one more secret? With everything that it's gone through in the past few decades, like why do we need one more secret within the Catholic Church? And I understand on a very basic level why people would tell LGBT people with same-sex attraction, gender dysphoria, to not come out, to stay in the closet. Because there's this rhetoric, there's this idea that kind of the more you talk about it, the more you accept it. But I still struggle to come up with an analogy to help people understand why it's so helpful to come out. But we're not talking about, hey, I want to go have sex. Like when we're talking about these questions of identity, we're talking about like the fundamental draw to give and receive love, and that's like that has nothing to do with sex. That is nothing to do. This is about connection. And if I can't share all of who I am with somebody, then I can't experience connection. Being gay is not the most important thing. Many people, I've heard many other LGBT people say, like, it is not even close to the most interesting thing about who they are, who I am. But it's just like interwoven into so many other aspects because it plays into, how I talk, how I show up, how I think about my hobbies, with how much Catholicism has interwoven like this idea of masculinity, of femininity, of identity, of personhood. Like Catholicism has intertwined sexuality into everything so that it isn't just a matter of me not talking about this quote one sin in my life. It's cutting off my ability to form connections and relationships with others, which is what Catholics say we're supposed to do. So it's undermining the very things that we're supposed to be doing as gay Catholics, queer Catholics.
Oh, for sure. I mean, if we're preaching truth, I find it really inconsistent with that principle if we are telling people to hide things about themselves, especially if it's so personal. Even if somebody wants to project a negative opinion to how someone relates to another human, in this case through sexuality, we are made for relationship with other people. And the idea that God is so creative and so vast in all of these different ways, but there's only one specific way that somebody could possibly relate to another human, I find it a little bit silly and a little bit defensive. But even before challenging the church to go deeper in our understanding of the human person, which theologians are definitely working on faithfully with the magisterium, the big problem is that culture of secrecy. And unfortunately, wherever you have secrecy, you're going to have folks who take advantage of that. Jon, I was previewing this with you earlier. I don't know how many complaints we'll end up getting, but I have a very, very hot take.
Hit me with it. Let's hear it.
Well, I do love Fulton Sheen in many ways.
Yeah.
He was made for TikTok and Instagram Reels well before social media came around. But there is one quote that irks me so deep down. It is when he said there are not 100 people in the United States who hate the Catholic Church, but there are millions who hate what they wrongly perceive the Catholic Church to be. I really wish he was here so I could just slap him silly gently. Gently, yes, because he's still a bishop and I still have respect for him, and his theology was groundbreaking for the new media of his time. However, if not 100 people in the United States, sir, there were almost 500 abuse victims in your diocese and quite a few from the 3 years that you were bishop there. And yes, I know that he was found to have handled everything well during that time, and I don't challenge that. But we have had such a blindness to all of the grievances going on around us. And although we want to keep and maintain that perfect image of the Catholic Church, I do think that if we're preaching truth, we have to kind of look deep down and figure out, okay, what are the things that we need to correct? So I posed a question to you by email, Justin. It was about the coming out process and whether or not you found any sort of similarities to those that you may know from your time as a missionary when they were converting. And of course, Jon, you've talked through your conversion story a number of times. But are there any similarities between the coming out process and the conversion to Catholicism?
Yeah, I think that both of them are like start with this real curiosity. Like there's something that piques your interest. And I think there's this idea of like a more expansive way of living. I think by being a part of the Catholic Church, by returning to Catholicism, by falling in love with the church when I was in high school, right? It painted this idea of a greater purpose, a bigger world, that there was a mission that I had in this life. And the fact that right, God could speak to me in all things, you know? And I think at the same time, when I was looking at coming out, there was this almost light at the end of the tunnel of like this hope of, again, a more expansive life, that there was like this deeper truth that I was coming to know and understand, that it was going to give new meaning to my life, a new understanding of who I was as a person, to help me relate to others better. And so I think that, and both of them in their own way are countercultural, being Catholic is in some sense countercultural, kind of, although it is weirdly trending on TikTok right now.
It is definitely the cool thing to do at the moment.
I never in a million years thought that I would get to this point, when I was in my early 30s, because everything in my 20s was everyone's leaving the church, we have to fight to bring it back. And now it's like this cool thing. And then like obviously in Catholic circles, it's countercultural, at least for my understanding in the Catholic circles I was a part of, it was counterculture to come out, to accept this part of who you are and to not try and change it.
There is a theologian in Belgium that talks about the interruption of theology. Of course, we say that God is love, not that he is lovely or loving, but that he himself is love. And he says, whenever somebody pursues an ideology too far, there's ultimately going to be a failing. And I guess in some ways, there's that issue where if you're coming out and this kind of becomes your only focus and it's not grounded in anything else, there's spiritually some dangers there. But at the same time, if you're pursuing Catholicism by looking at it as a rigid set of rules, you're failing to encounter the being. You run the risk of failing to encounter that very being that we call love, God. And so how would you recommend that somebody who is coming out and trying to stay Catholic, like how do you find that balance? Is it even possible?
Mm-hmm. the thing that brought me back to the church was probably Holy Week. Like that is just, it is smells and bells and dramatic and candles and light. And like, I love it. It's so much fun. And any church that does not try to make Holy Week dramatic is doing it wrong. Go read the missal again, right? Or
Yes.
the missal. And I remember going to the Easter Vigil for the first time after, not going for several years. And, you get to the point where people are being baptized. And then we all get to renew our baptismal promises and just being like, that's why I'm Catholic. Like that is fundamental to our faith, that we believe in God, that we believe in the Trinity, that we believe that God is a person through Jesus and that he established a church. Like that's what we believe. We didn't go into all the idiosyncrasies of what modern Catholicism is defending in the world right now. And it's not to say that those aren't important discussions to be having, but like you're saying, I think it's so easy, especially with this new movement in, United States Catholicism that I think is really driving. So, has been driving so much of the church is it makes Catholicism more about believing the right, things or saying no to the wrong things that are bad, and removing the relationship with God, the relationship with Jesus from the core of what Catholicism is. Because Catholicism is about making the invisible reality present through the sacraments in the same way that Jesus made visible God, so that we can encounter God throughout the world more easily, right? The sacraments are not an end in and of themselves. They're supposed to help us have a window to who God is and God's nature, and to allow us to see God more clearly in the created world at large.
I appreciate that you said United States Catholicism, because we've talked extensively about the differences. Obviously, Catholicism is a united family. We are all a little bit different and we're all a little bit weird in our own ways. But my husband and I, and for the record, John is not my husband for anyone that's a new listener.
He wasn't good enough for me. It's fine.
I didn't settle, no. But I also married up. And
Chris is awesome. You're right.
We had a Catholic blessing ceremony in Belgium. Now, there are 6 dioceses in the world where the Vatican has given special permission beyond fiducia supplicans to allow like a ritual style blessing. And it's focused very much in this theological understanding that wherever there is love, even if we think it's imperfect, even if we think that it's lacking structurally, meaning you don't have the male-female differences you would in a sacramental marriage, even if the church is still projecting a partial negative opinion on the couple, and that's just a reality, that we should still acknowledge and bless wherever there is love. And the church should and must find a way to accompany people in that without condemning. And, over there, they've become so open-minded isn't the word, but they pursue love in such an authentic way in their parishes. I can't tell you how hard I laughed when they said, "Oh, why don't you invite all of your Virginia priest friends to come to this ceremony and con-celebrate?" And I was like, I don't think so.
No.
They didn't get it. In fact, there was, when we were talking with the archdiocese, there was an initial question, why would we not want our ritual ceremony in Northern Virginia? So, and I don't know if that applies to you and your diocese, Justin. Maybe we can invite all of the priest friends around there, but
no, probably not.
But the theologian that I'm touching upon here is Lieven Bove, Boeve. And he talks about how when he looked at the history of socialism and Marxism, how you had a handful of people at the top of those ideologies, and they were super passionate about following the truth of those ideologies. And of course, they fixed, in many ways, many injustices. And then you also have to look at who it was at the expense of. And with capitalism, Lieven Bove also looks at how capitalism, in many ways, it's like rising tides lift all boats. But then he says, you also have to look at the people that are left out, or maybe the inequality gap has grown. So Lieven Bove says that whenever you are following an ideal, whether it's a faith or a political ideology, that if you are pursuing perfection within that ideology, that you're going to fail to find that truth that you were first seeking for. And so I don't know, Jon, if you would agree with this, but I always say theology is reality. And we would not say that something is Catholic, therefore it's true. We would say that if something is true, then it is Catholic.
Yes.
Going back to the RCIA classes, I love leaning on your experiences from conversion, Jon. How would you describe the approach to teaching the faith?
I think, and a lot like our diocese here in the country, it really depends upon where you're located. Converting in a college environment, I think, was an interesting experience because not only did we have the campus ministers from the diocese that were kind of educating us, but we also had outside groups that were a part of this. I knew what you were looking for. Outside groups that were part of the the Catholic campus ministry that were also really leading the charge, whether it's through Bible study, whether it's through outreach. You really were, for lack of better terms, attacked from multiple Catholic angles, if you will. And then I think in the college environment, they did a really good job at kind of staying neutral across all the controversial topics. But again, I'll bring it up. We had that one class session where no topic was off limits and we were able to deep dive into everything. And I think that was the first moment that I realized that what some people would classify my radical opinions in the Catholic Church being, wanting it to be open and accepting of everyone. I don't like these limitations. I don't like the fact that people want to turn people away because of who God made them to be. I quickly realized I wasn't the only one that felt that way. And I thought that was great because I kept hearing about this youth movement in the Catholic Church, that it was going to get more, for lack of better terms, more conservative in the church, more traditionalist, if you will, that was the kind of movement. But yet here I am in my RCIA class and everyone's more open-minded. They're willing to question things. They're not afraid of asking questions. They're not afraid of challenging church authority or church teaching, maybe if it's for better understanding, but they weren't afraid to speak up. Whereas some of the people that I interacted with in that community and now outside of that community, my local parishes, are still afraid to speak up or speak out when they see something, right? We talk a lot about the dirty laundry that the church has. And obviously when you convert to a religion, you inherit that dirty laundry also. In my time with the Franciscans, part of my ministry in the Archdiocese of Chicago was helping out with these parishes with a parish program that was not very popular because it shut parishes down. But it essentially was a way of building community again because community was getting too thin. People were getting pushed out. So for me, I like the fact that through my RCIA and through my lived experience in the church, it has been a mission of trying to help people be more open and welcoming and accepting in the church instead of giving them what I have dubbed the Catholic side eye, which may also translate to Catholic guilt, but the Catholic side eye to other people in the pews. You are there in the pews to worship your God. You're not there to cast judgment at the person in the third pew from the left.
Yes.
It's become a trend, particularly in the English-speaking countries, to move towards apologetics.
Yes.
Obviously, you can see a lot of accounts online that are dedicated to apologetics. And if we're being honest, they do a lot of really good work. So it is not just a lot of risk or a lot of harming individuals for having a different opinion. But if God, the very being of God, is love, then our faith cannot be about a quote unquote argument. So, Jon, I'll ask you first and then I'll ask Justin, but you're a veteran Catholic now.
Am I? Have I reached that stage of Catholicism?
Wait, how many years have you been Catholic? I'll weigh in on this.
10 football seasons,
Okay.
right?
That's an interesting metric.
Easter 2013. Oh my gosh, I'm old. Okay, yeah, it's been a while. Easter 2013.
Your youth is just going poof.
Yeah, I'm going to sign up for AARP real quick. I'll be right back.
So
I think you have some credibility.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right, we'll go
for sure. He has a lot of really good experience in different environments.
Yeah,
both with the Franciscans and serving those who have felt discarded. And you've also been in environments where the faith has been more argumentative. So what would your advice be to the church? How would you tell the Catholic Church to be, if we're preaching truth and love, then we have to be open to some surprises. So what advice would you give to the Catholic Church about building a better environment going forward?
I love this. And if my parents ever listen to this podcast, they're going to love that I said this also.
Sending them a text right now?
Yeah, because I guarantee you they're going to oh, as a kid, John never listened to us. He never heard anything we said. I would love for the church to listen before they speak. I get you're coming from a place of religious authority, and I understand that. But in order to better be a leader of your people, be the shepherd of your people, you need to listen to the voices from the pews, from the people standing in the back, not even in the pews, the people in the vestibule, the people in the parking lot, the people down the street. You need to listen to your community. You need to listen to the people and actually listen and comprehend, and not jump to, oh, they said something I don't disagree with, I need to jump in and correct them. Listen before you speak, something I still to this day struggle with. But honestly, that is going to be key in a lot of things, because that's where misunderstanding is people don't actively listen. They hear you, but they do not actively listen. There is a very big difference between the two. I ask our listeners to go ahead and look up the difference between listening versus hearing. And I think that was hammered into me even more with my time with the Franciscans, because of our community outreach to our homeless ministries, to our food pantries, and reaching out to those who common society has kind of discarded because they don't wear, the latest fashionable clothes, or they may live in a bad neighborhood and people just don't want to associate with them because of their fear of their social reputation being harmed. Reaching out to those people and actually listening and hearing what they're saying and building community with them and giving them back their human dignity is the biggest thing. And you do that through actively listening to people. And I think that's something that the church, if they actually took a step back and did that, would really, really help, I don't know, possibly fill pews again.
John, there were 3 errors at least in what you just said. And so we will say a prayer for you after and hope that it does some magic. So
I'm triggered. Thank you.
Justin, what are your hopes and dreams for the church? What would you recommend that the church do to make a better environment going forward?
Yeah, I think John, I love what you said there. Yeah, I think maybe to provide a little bit more structure to what you said, because I kind of want to just steal it, is right. So the fundamentals of Catholicism is based off of Plato and this idea that there are these ideals that we're supposed to be living towards, which is amazing. It's a really great idea. But I think we also forget that Aquinas was revolutionary for how he brought in Aristotle to his writings, into his philosophy, right? And Plato is very much top down. We're starting with first things, building a world out of that. And then Aristotle is very much let me look at the created world and then build something from the ground up. And Dan, what you were saying, reality has to be the test of our theology. If our theology doesn't work in the real world, then it can't be of God. If natural law is really real, then it should be evident in the lives of people, whether they are Catholic or not. And so I think it would just be how are these things actually, pick whatever topic you want to, but how is this actually impacting the lives of the people within the congregation? And what you were saying, John, not then to write off oh, this person, is gay and is struggling. Well, they just don't believe enough. They just don't pray enough. They just haven't done XYZ enough. But if something isn't working, to avoid the tendency to get defensive in those moments and to say I'm not even here to say that the Catholic Church needs to radically change its whole theology on LGBT people. I think there's plenty of things that could change that I would like to see change. I know the limits of the church, but I think the church has to listen, that if somebody's saying, hey, this isn't working, that for me, so much in my own life, the anxiety, the depression, just the pain and the isolation of being in the closet, something wasn't working. And so before we get to this place of saying, oh, you are trying to change theology, you are trying to tear down the church, yeah, can we just start with, if this isn't working for people, if something isn't right, then what is wrong with that? Like what do we need to change? Be it this issue or like any issue within the church right now. And I think maybe on a more positive, practical note, to be open to, and I think you mentioned this, Dan, in the email that you sent over, but to be open to seeing God in those unexpected places, right? Jesus was like the king of finding God and talking about God in the most unexpected and crazy stories. And we take them for granted now about like, oh, we've got like the tax collector, we've got the sex worker, like, oh, look at how Jesus is finding God in all these things and bringing good out of them. But we forget how revolutionary that was, how much he scandalized people. I think in the same way, we need to just be open and curious to seeing, okay, well, in 2025, what are the people that would make the most churchy individuals? Like, who are the people that Jesus would go to that would make the most churchy individuals really uncomfortable? And I was like, are we listening to and engaging with those populations?
When I sent my resignation letter to the individual that I was working for with the Vatican, I said, first off, it was a really, really difficult letter to send because my entire life I had just imagined of being this perfect Catholic working for the Holy See, and somehow I made it. And unfortunately, once I made it, I then had to deal with all the things that I had pushed deep down. And so in my resignation letter, I said, what saint does not take a risk? What saint is not bold? And Justin, what you said about Aquinas is really important, and it needs to be like underlined, bold, italicized. Aquinas was revolutionary. Aquinas was writing for a world where people were afraid of plague. They were afraid of childbirth. They were afraid of thunder and lightning. They thought it was a sign that God was definitely angry with the town. And Aquinas' goal was to structure their fears of everyday life and anchor it in a sacramental encounter that was real. And he did it super successfully, but not without controversy. The university he taught at was censored by the bishop. So I believe it was University of Paris. Don't remember the exact year, but he was in deep trouble. And the Dominicans, recognizing that Aquinas had something special, came to his defense very successfully. Quite frankly, it was their defense of him that made him so prominent. And now I wonder, in this world where everything seems maybe equally as discombobulated as perhaps it did in a world where we were afraid of plague and war and lightning, what is the new real sacramental encounter? Still the same sacramental encounter that Aquinas was aiming for, no doubt. But how do we find that genuine understanding of God's love in today's world? And so it reminds me of what we were joking about in the last episode. What did we call it? Barehanding?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, we got a reaction from you, Justin. Can you describe what barehanding is?
Yeah. So when I used to work in some Catholic circles, we would spend time going out onto pick your location, right? But wherever there'd be lots of people around, and I would typically go with like one other person, at least one other person at a time. And we would walk up to total strangers and just try to strike up a conversation with them. There was, in some sense, no set agenda, but being a Catholic, obviously wanting to talk about faith and Catholic things, and typically there was some sort of event that we'd want to invite people to at the end. But it was spiritual conversations, trying to understand where people were at, and obviously on some level trying to draw out inconsistencies or subtly or not so subtly convince them that they should be Catholic, and that's kind of what they're looking for. I would love to believe
that sounds like an agenda.
It is. It's so hard. I hated those, so I try to block all of them out. I try to believe that maybe I was slightly less pushy than some people were, but I also knew who I was at the time and wanted everyone to be as Catholic, believe that I was the fullness of Catholicism and how it should be lived, and everyone else should live like me.
John, you loved being on the receiving end of this on our college campus, right?
If sarcasm could kill, yeah. No, as I said in our last episode, I absolutely hated it. And it wasn't just the Catholic campus ministry that was doing it. It was a lot of other different religions, whether it was, the non-denominational, you can't conform me, I follow the word of God, standing on a milk carton yelling at college kids that sex, drugs, and rock and roll sending you to hell. Or it was the Mormon missionaries asking if a political candidate was worthy of Christ's endorsement, or whether it was missionaries from an organization on campus stopping me on my 15-minute journey across campus that took 18 minutes to get across, and trying not to get there late so the professor wouldn't let me into the class. Nothing was better than being accosted by someone barehanding me through campus, asking me if I want to go to mass with them or what my relationship with God was. And
I can feel your eyes on me right now like a laser, and I already apologized for the way I behaved in 2013.
It wasn't you.
Well,
shockingly enough.
So Justin, I was definitely a part of the Bearhanding team, partially because I worked in politics and I just kind of loved accosting people gently. No, I really did love knocking on doors. That is something I've been to literally 10,000 plus homes, asking people how they're going to vote. And so I was like, why not apply this to faith? Faith is important. The problem was, at least in my situation, I think we were primed to believe, okay, we're being sent by God to bring the word. And we just set ourselves up for a huge spiritual failing, because somebody like John would have a very legitimate need to get to class or to get to the grocery store in the next 5 minutes, whatever it was. And we would see them running off and being like, oh, we have to pray for him, And it was, I don't think we realized it was judgmental, but we saw ourselves as this sort of quasi savior, and that we were bringing the truth to them and they weren't open to listening to it. And of course, that is a total failure of, what we were talking about with Liebenbove's theology of interruption, where we have to allow ourselves to be punctuated by the love of encountering another person. And so if I didn't even bother to get to know why it was that you had to rush off, not that it was my right to stop you anyway, but if I wasn't actually interested in understanding whatever pressing issue was on your heart that day, and I'm just trying to convince you that my argument and my Bible study is the right one, no matter how true that may have been. No, I mean, we set ourselves up for these spiritual failings because we had turned God into an argument and a club that we had to recruit people to, but it's a two-way street. And as you mentioned, John, with your Franciscan experience, I think you said, in other words, that the people that you met on the street that were discarded, they changed you. Like, you learned something about Christ from them. And so that would be, the barehanding is not the way of the future, at least in our culture.
Yeah, I think the two things I want to point out is one, especially in a college environment, while the idea of barehanding may seem, great, you're called to spread the word, that's great, but my Catholicism, it has a little bit more of that Franciscan twang to it, if you will. So I firmly believe in meeting Christ in the people where they are. So my thing is, if you see that college kid running through campus, they're in a hurry, maybe ask them why they're in such a hurry, or, take a moment to connect with them on a human level before you dive deep into religious theology or Catholic theology or inviting them to mass. It may seem simple in your mind, but to them, you don't know what they're going through. You don't know what's going on in their head. You don't know what their life is like. And so just kind of stopping them and throwing religion directly onto them can come across as super hostile. And I've talked about it through my conversion story, is it wasn't the missionaries on campus. It wasn't the barehanders on campus that drew me to the church. It was the people who were subtly wearing the CCM shirts on campus that held the door open for you with a smile. That was just being kind, because that alone was countercultural. The people who were, that looked at you as another person without judgment, it felt like they were just happy to see you there. It was through actions, not just words. And I think that's what it is your actions. Well, while words are great to better understand actions, it's the initial action that will get people's attention. So if you meet people where they are and you bring it to a more human level through your actions instead of preaching at them, you're going to make those connections, and they're going to be more meaningful connections. And then maybe even if they don't convert, maybe even if they don't, change their opinion on organized religion or religion in general, or the idea of a deity, you still have that human connection that you can still show God's love through. It's again comes down to the basic ideology of meeting people where they're at. Christ met the people in his time when he walked this earth where they were at. He didn't go up to the tax collector and said, "Hey, you come be holy and hang out with me." He said, "You know what? You're not holy. I'm gonna go hang out with you."
Yeah.
Like that's what it is. It's where it comes down. You meet the people where they are at.
And I think that displays too, and like what I look back on, especially in my time in those, when I was in those spaces, was like how much of an agenda I brought to meeting people. And I just, right, like Jesus healed people, and it wasn't like, I'm going to heal you if you follow me. Like he just healed people. Like you were saying, he provided for people's real needs. And I think that the like moments of talking with strangers about your faith are such an opportunity to love people unconditionally. Not to say, how can I convince them of something? How can I convert them to Catholicism in one plane ride? But how can I just meet this person exactly where they're at and love them? Because people can see when you have an agenda with them. People can see when you're trying to get them to a certain spot to believe a certain thing. And I know in my own life, like they say, whatever, pick your random statistic, but in a conversation, your mind can only be changed 5%, 10%, something like that. But I think for me, like that's what I want to practice, because when I'm talking with somebody, no matter whether they agree with me or disagree with me, like I don't get to encounter them as a person if I'm trying to get them to a certain spot. And it is still so hard for me. But like if I'm just practicing, how am I seeing this person as a human? How am I seeing this person as a beloved child of God? How am I encountering them as they are and loving them exactly as they are? Like to me, that feels way more like the work of Jesus. And I think a way harder way to show up in this world. It's easy for me to show up with somebody with my talking points. It's easy for me to like get into sparring mode to defend the faith. And like, I've been preparing for this. Like, it's way harder to sit with someone who, and maybe they're in college and questioning their major and don't know what to do with their life. Maybe I'm on a plane ride with somebody and they've got like family stuff, and for whatever reason, they start opening up with a complete stranger. And to not provide like these really glib answers of like, Jesus is here, Jesus can provide, but just sit in the discomfort and be with them as a human, to love them without trying to provide this perfect explanation. I think that's way more like Jesus. I think that's way harder to actually do.
We've talked about this in some of our earlier episodes, how a lot of folks will say, well, yeah, you can be here, but like you have to sin no more. Like you have to, like flipping a light switch. Converting is, the light switch is now on and that old life is dead. No, that is not how it worked. When Jesus said to the woman, get up and sin no more, if you look at, it was written in Greek, sin no more it's an archery term. It's more like, hey, you missed the mark and we want to help you get that bullseye. And so in a way, Jesus is actually committing to be a coach. He's not committing to be a lawyer or a judge. He's committing to be a coach for you and your circumstance. And what good coach did you ever have in sports growing up that just like discounted you? Although we have talked about how in 8th grade basketball, I was a bench warmer, did not get a single basket.
I went to one basketball practice in junior high, freaked out and left and never went back. So you're better than me.
So, as we start to come towards a close here, Justin, do you have any other advice that you would give to the church to create a better theological and spiritual landscape for the next generation?
Yeah, I think I just want to remind Catholics, no matter what level they're at in the church, who are trying to answer this question, who have a genuine understanding, how can we make it better, is that the people that you're trying to reach, whether that's LGBT people, society at large, non-Catholics, whatever group you're doing outreach to, like the vast majority of people want to have a connection with God or do have a connection with God. And that it's not that society has somehow become less religious. It's not that somehow people are hating God, but I think that people are looking for a connection, something that's genuine. People are looking for a community to be a part of. And rather than starting with, you have to believe the right things to be part of the Catholic Church, you have to behave exactly the right way, but just opening up the doors and saying, all right, you belong. You are here. We are all called to worship before God. We are all part of the family of God, and kind of trusting that God's going to work out the rest of it. Like you are not personally responsible for somebody else's salvation. They are figuring out their salvation with fear and trembling. You are a person on that journey, but you are not that person's journey. And you do not have to put that pressure on yourself that you are single-handedly responsible for whether or not somebody goes to heaven.
That's perfect advice. It's hard to upstage empty chairs himself.
It is, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Really.
No.
Thank you.
Justin, we're so grateful for your time today. And as I close out with the listeners here, let's be honest, they're probably already subscribed to you at Empty Chairs on Instagram and TikTok. And are there any other platforms?
Empty Chairs Home.
Empty Chairs Home. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other platforms?
You can check out my website, which has my writing on it. There's also some prayers and devotions there as well. That's empty-chairs.org, and check that out.
That's fantastic. And of course, as we've tried to help everyone discover today, no matter what it is that you are going through in your life, that Jesus Christ is excited to accompany you in this lifelong journey of opening up to Him. And it's going to be messy, and that is totally fine. And you can reach out to me and Jon on social media or on our website. You can reach out to Justin. It sounds like he already gets plenty of messages, but we are really, really delighted that you took the time to listen, and know that we are praying for you. Okay, until next time.